In this video, I covered human and non-human threats. So to begin, we're going to talk about non-human internal threats. We have hardware or software failure. So when I worked as a data center intern, my job was to go into the data center and pull out hard drives that have failed. And then I would scrub them using a giant magnet just to make sure that all the data was gone before we disposed of the hard drives. If you do not have redundancy or the ability to restore the data and a hard drive fails, then you're out of luck. The next threat is the utility failure or spike. So this could be due to power failures or power surges that cause your systems to be damaged. Along this vein, we have several natural disasters such as excessive heat, lightning strikes, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, etc. So here we have a janitor, we have our own employees, we have consultants, and we have security. Why would they be considered some of the biggest security threats? Well, to answer that question is that they are already within the network. So they are already past many of the security controls that we have in place. So let's go to human threats, beginning with employee and ex-employee threats. The first one we want to talk about is sabotage. Sabotage could be the destruction of hardware, software, or data. Additionally, a human could build logic or time bombs that when certain logic executes or after a certain time, their malicious code is going to execute and cause severe damage. This way they could kind of obscure what they're doing because the event of the time bomb or the logic bomb doesn't happen until well after they've left the organization. Another human threat is that of hackers that are able to bypass many of the controls that we have in place because they're able to take advantage of zero-day attacks or other vulnerabilities that we have. It also employees within our organization. Here we have another threat of financial theft. I once heard the story of this employee that worked for a bank, and instead of rounding up the percentage of interest that people accumulated that was the lowest cent, banks would just truncate that. But instead of truncating it, which means chop off any digits past the second digit, an employee was able to program the software to deposit any excess micro interest into his bank account. In the process, he made a lot of money and eventually was caught for this action. Another type of threat is intellectual property theft. A lot of competing organizations and individuals try to gather information from other companies so that they can use that as a starting ground or to help them arrive where their competitors are a lot faster. Another human threat is internet abuse. In this case, you'll see employees or individuals that are downloading pirated software, seeing things that they shouldn't be, like pornography, or getting distracted while at work. By engaging in these high-risky behaviors, employees open the door to many attacks, which we'll talk about at a later point. And then finally, we have just carelessness. Those that are not paying attention, that are sloppy in their code, that could cause problems that could lead to eventual damage. As for non-human perpetrators, we have malware, which is the generic name for any evil software. So first, we will talk about viruses. Viruses are programs that attach themselves to legitimate programs. Viruses could be used for many purposes, such as stealing code, tracking user behavior, capturing credentials, etc. The next type of malware is a worm. A worm is a program that does not need to attach itself because it is a standalone program. The problem with worms is that they can directly propagate their worm-like structure from computer to computer within a network without having to have any human intervention. So once a worm is on a network, it is problematic because it could potentially take down an entire network. Our next type of malware is a drive-by download. A drive-by download is code that has been implanted into like a web server, for example, that when users interact with a website that they normally trust, they don't realize that there has been a drive-by download that has been implanted into the server. So they interact with like the credentials or whatever they need to with the server. And unbeknownst to them, the JavaScript code behind the scenes is capturing that information and forwarding it to the hacker or criminal that implanted that code in the first place. The next type of malware is a rootkit. A rootkit is malware that takes control of the superuser account. This is critical because superuser accounts are usually locked down, but when you have root level access, you can essentially do anything with that system. A rootkit is something that you definitely do not want on your system because it can hide the malware, it could delete files, it could do almost anything that a superuser could do. The next type of malware is spyware. Spyware is malicious software that is used to do many different things, such as install keyloggers, steal passwords, spy on what you're doing. This could even be physically seeing the videos as well as keystrokes. It could enable cookies that store too much sensitive personal information that can be gathered later on. The next type of malware is the Trojan horse. As we know with the story of the city of Troy that was destroyed by a Trojan horse that was allowed into the city, and then the army came out of the horse in the middle of the night and destroyed the city. We also liken this to computer malware in that there are many attractive programs such as movie files or audio files or pictures that we would love to have. Some people like to get these things illegally, and usually with this illegal software, they don't realize what they are allowing onto their system. So the Trojan horse is downloaded, and then the malicious code inside the file is executed, allowing direct access to the machine. So for example, we have remote access Trojans that allow someone to remote into your machine just because you downloaded this specific file. We also have maybe small Trojan horses that grow to be larger Trojan horses. So I strongly encourage you to stay away from downloading files that are pirated or pornographic, because that's where you'll see a lot of these files that you don't want on your machine. The next type of malware is payloads. Payloads are pieces of code that actually do damage to your system. They're usually implemented by viruses or worms, but the damage is sometimes irreparable if we do not have backups in play. Some examples of malware throughout the ages. First, we have the I love you, which only took 230 lines of code that impacted 10% of all internet computers back in 2000. In 2003, we had the slammer worm, which basically started and then caused denial of service, which means that you couldn't access any machines, and it had spread throughout most of the world within a matter of few hours. A more recent example of this is WannaCrypt. As you can see here on this map, how much of the world that it impacted. It caused many health organizations to have to completely shut down their network to prevent this from spreading. But what WannaCrypt did is that it was a ransomware that locked down computer systems. And in order to be able to recover all your files, you had to pay a certain Bitcoin within a certain amount of time. And if you didn't, then you were not given your credentials to be able to unlock those files. And many people paid the Bitcoin to be able to get their files because they didn't have backups. The bigger problem here is that when you're paying, there is no promise that you're going to get the decryption key to get your files back. And you're also supporting these criminal organizations. So just make sure that you have everything backed up so that this doesn't happen. Going back to the human perpetrators, we have social engineering, which uses any technique of social skills and interacting with others to be able to get them to reveal sensitive information. So take, for example, I knew a consultant that would go and work at these organizations to be able to see where their weaknesses were. And he was able to use piggybacking to be able to get into the company's business rather than having to swipe his card. He followed someone into the building, and he was able to go up to the CEO's office, which was open, and the CEO wasn't in there, and his computer was open. And he basically went down and put a coin down on the desk, indicating that this organization had been infiltrated. Shoulder surfing is another problem with this. This is the process of looking over someone's shoulder to be able to gather their credentials or any information that the individual wouldn't normally want you to have. One example that was provided to me by the FBI is that of business email compromise. So let's say we have Richard here, who's a romance scammer. His real name is Michael. And Richard interacts with Susan, who is the scam victim. He sends an email, and they coordinate back and forth, expressing their love for each other. And Alex, who's associated with Richard or works with Richard, is an email fraudster. He sends an email to Cindy, who works as a controller at Widgets.inc, basically asking for payment for an invoice. And so Cindy verifies this and ends up notifying Jerry that they need to pay for this invoice. Jerry is given the details of who he should pay to, and that's normally the correct bank. But Alex, in the process, was able to send information to Jerry saying, hey, actually, we need to change the address of where this money is going to be sent. So Jerry makes those changes and forwards the payment to Susan's account instead of directly to the account that they need to pay it to. Prior to this, Richard had emailed Susan letting her know that she would receive this money and she would need to send that money to him. And so she does, but instead of having this money go directly to Richard, it goes back to Joseph, who is our money mule. Joseph then sends the money to Richard and keeps a percentage for his work, and then Richard shares this money with Alex. So in this case, the company is scammed, and Susan, who's the romance scam victim, is held accountable because the money was deposited in her account, and even though she was part of this romance scam. So there are many types of malware out there that use social engineering as well, such as spam. That's why we have spam blockers, but make sure that you don't just trust everything that you're receiving. You have typo squatting. You have individuals, organizations, and governments that actually build URLs that are similar to other sites, like you can see here, goggle.com, where if someone types in this information, instead of going to Google, it goes to this other account. And so a lot of companies will purchase up these URLs in a hope that they can get traffic directed to them. So for example, Amazon, you could write as Arnazon, A-R-N, and people wouldn't really notice that the R and the N are two letters, and it might look like Amazon at quick glance. Good thing is that Amazon does own Arnazon for this particular reason. You have phishing as another type of attack, which uses deception to acquire personal information. So often these are going to be emails that look not so legit in the past, but they are becoming more and more legit, especially with the advent of AI. And so we got to use due diligence to make sure that we are not susceptible to these phishing attacks. An even more difficult attack to avoid is spear phishing. Spear phishing is the technique of learning a bunch of details about a person or organization and targeting that person with specific details so that their phishing messages seem more legit and they're more likely to get a response from it. Then you also have all these internet hoaxes that are passed around, which is becoming a bigger problem with social media and everyone spreading all this false information. One site that I recommend that you go to is snopes.com that can help you with that. Other phishing examples that you may see is that companies try to phish their employees to see that if they've been vigilant and done their due diligence. Here's another example of a funny phishing email that came from a student that went to all of the students at our university. Another attack is autofill phishing. As you can see here, we're filling out the details. We hit submit. If we go to the actual behind the scenes details, you'll notice that this person's address, city, phone, etc. was all captured with this phishing. So with autofill, be careful with that. Usually autofill, you want to make sure you only have it fill in one field at a time, or use sites you're only willing to trust. It is not very difficult to build this autofill attack. All right, I want you to test your own prowess with phishing messages. Visit one of the following 3 links, start the phishing test, answer each of the 8 to 10 questions that will help you identify the legitimacy of the emails. And then I want you to think about what are some of the indications that you noticed with these phishing messages. I strongly recommend you do this activity as you may recognize some things or patterns that you didn't realize that could be part of detecting phishing. Thanks for watching my video. Feel free to click the links here to watch the next video of the playlist, continue to the next playlist, or subscribe.